My name is Melisa Genaux, and today's topic is 5 behavioral issues with kids with Asperger syndrome, why they happen, and how to fix them. So, our format today will be to discuss some issues that are pretty common with kids with AS, and we will talk about why the behaviors happen, what the hardwiring is that's related to those, and then we'll talk about some research based interventions and strategies that work well to help kids learn new behaviors and to develop more social skills and more self regulation skills to take the place of those misbehaviors. So we'll start by talking about what some of the common issues are. Across school and home, lots of people report dealing with things like arguing, meltdowns over changes in routine. Lots of times people talk about kids wanting to get attention from peers or siblings in a way that's not quite appropriate. Lots of people talk about interrupting with a topic of interest, interrupting at home or perseverating on a topic when it's not a good time. So we'll cover those kinds of common issues, and again with each of the behaviors, we'll talk about why they happen and then talk about some strategies. One of the questions I get asked often by parents and teachers is what is hardwired behavior and what is deliberate misbehavior? And everyone wants to know what's the Asperger syndrome and what is just deliberate naughty behavior. And my answer is always the same. It's always both. Misbehavior is grounded in some hardwiring with Asperger syndrome, and then there's also a learning piece that goes on. So as soon as kids are born, they begin to learn what works for them and what doesn't. So it's kind of hard to separate what is part of the autism or Asperger syndrome and what is just deliberate behavior. It's really always a combination of those things. I think that knowing the source of the behavior matters. It matters for parents and it matters for teachers to know why a kid is doing something. Very often it really is related to a language issue or some kind of deficit in social skills repertoire. So we'll talk about those again, why it happens, and then we'll quickly move on for in each case onto some strategies that you can use. So our next section then is going to start with the behaviors, and the first behavior is arguing and noncompliance with directions. That's a fairly common issue with all kids on and off the spectrum. But with kids with Asperger syndrome, a lot of times it's directly related to a literal interpretation or a narrow interpretation of language and of rules, home rules or class rules. It's related to perseveration on classroom issues or home issues, and a lot of times a need for closure on those issues. A lot of times kids want to talk about it until it's really settled in their mind, and so they sometimes will perseverate on an issue either at school or at home. And another reason the behavior happens is there's a lack of perspective taking with kids on the spectrum. Sometimes it's hard for them to put themselves in other people's shoes, and it's hard for them to figure out that other people have a different viewpoint from theirs. And then finally, I think it's really related to arguing is really related to deficits in self-regulatory skills, and those skills have to do with waiting your turn, or reading your environment, reading the cues around you, or inhibiting impulses, inhibiting that impulse to take that piece of food off your sibling's plate, or inhibiting the impulse to grab a book from someone, or not reading your environment well. So those are the issues related to the spectrum on why there sometimes can be arguing. A couple of intervention strategies to try are the following. Number one is to teach a replacement behavior for arguing. And as we go through these, you'll see on the PowerPoint that the appendices are just labeled with Roman numerals. So Appendix 1, Appendix 2, Appendix 3 and so forth. So they are embedded in the PowerPoint, and we'll just move right through those as we talk about them. So this first one, teaching a replacement behavior for arguing, is Appendix 1, and we're going to talk about what that looks like. So the replacement behavior then is to teach a kid to say okay. So you teach the verbal response okay. So when you're giving a direction to a kid, let's say you want your child to go brush their teeth at night. It's time for bed, so you say, Jeremy, go brush your teeth, please. Say okay. And you actually prompt them to say okay after you give the direction. So they're prompted to use the phrase okay as soon as you give the direction, and then you reinforce for number one, saying okay, and for compliance with the direction. So if you have a little chart or a point card on the refrigerator or at school, you could give 1 point for saying okay and 1 point for following the direction. Now, if the kid just says okay but doesn't do it, they'd still get 1 point. Or if they follow the direction but don't say okay when you've prompted it, then they get 1 point. The purpose of this is twofold. Number one, if someone is saying okay, that is replacement behavior for arguing. So they can't, it's incompatible with arguing. They can't be saying yes but or I don't want to at the exact same time that they're saying okay. So it teaches a verbal response that will replace or helps to replace that initial kind of urge to argue. And the second thing it does is it provides kind of a cue to the kid that they are going to do it. There is research that tells us that if kids and adults verbalize that they are going to do something, they are more likely to do it. So if a kid says okay and makes that quick verbal commitment, they are more likely to actually follow through. It's just a little psychological trick that when we state that we are doing something, we're more likely to do it. So teaching the kid to say okay as soon as you give the direction is one way to help avert arguing. The second strategy for decreasing arguing is to teach what's called a delayed discussion or a discuss later option. So you actually teach the kid that you will discuss the topic at hand, but that this is not the right time. So this is great for home and for school. And what you do is just when the kid is calm and you're talking about how to deal with times when you have a disagreement or when they want to discuss something at the wrong time, you teach them ahead of time that what they need to do is just at school they would write their name down on a slip of paper, put it in a little box on the teacher desk, and then cross off a little time on a schedule. So you might have a schedule posted on the wall that has 3 5-minute time sections where they could make a little appointment. So if it were 3:30, 3:35, and 3:40, the kid would again write their name, put it in a box on the desk, cross out the 3:30 appointment, and so that they don't have to write their name in public, but just cross that out so that's taken. And then the student shows up, talks to the teacher, and has the discussion later, so it's not during an academic instruction time. At home, you'd use the exact same process. You would say, this is a discuss later topic. We can't discuss it right now. And so you use that phrase or that label, this is a discuss later topic, and the kid just does the same thing. Maybe walks over to the refrigerator, writes their name, that at 7 o'clock, you have maybe a little schedule on the refrigerator, 7 o'clock, talking to mom or talking to dad about this issue, so that you just schedule it at a later time. And then the discussion occurs with the adult, and I usually advise adults to have some scripted questions, so the topic or the conversation doesn't get kind of out of control and go on and on and on. So the adult is, in effect, just steering that conversation a bit. And so you say, your questions might be, what was it that bothered you? Or, what happened that you're concerned about? Let's talk about why that happened, what could we do to fix it, what can we do so that it doesn't happen again. So you could just have a few scripted questions to kind of steer the conversation. But again, what this does is it teaches a replacement behavior for arguing. So when the student or the kid at home wants to start arguing about something, if it's not a time that's optimal to talk, the adult just says, that's a discuss later topic. Kid writes their name wherever in the appropriate place to schedule a time, and then parent and kid or teacher and kid meet later and have the discussion. One of the nice things this does is it lets kids know that the adult is interested in talking and that they will be heard. I will listen to you, we just can't do it right now. And so you just give it that quick label, this is for discuss later, we'll talk about it in another time. And the kid feels, I think, a little bit less anxiety just knowing that someone will listen and that they will be heard, that they can talk through and problem solve and at least let their concerns be known. So if you're doing both of those things, you're teaching that say okay and having a delayed discussion option, then a lot of times you can prevent arguing across a lot of different settings. Our second topic is going to be interrupting with off-topic comments or perseverating on a topic when it's not the appropriate time. So this would be for times when the family is talking about something else and you need that kid to be on topic with you, or when a teacher is conducting instruction, when there's instruction going on in the classroom and it's not a time that the kid can interrupt with their topic of interest. And this is related to a couple of things. Again, the hardwiring with Asperger syndrome. It's a lack of perspective taking again. Not knowing that mom and dad don't want to talk about your topic right now. They need you to be on their topic, or not knowing that the teacher doesn't want to hear about your topic of interest right at this moment. So that general lack of perspective taking. And then also it's directly related to the fact that lots of kids with AS have an intense focus on some kind of topic of interest, and they have really persistent thoughts about it, and they want to talk about it. They want to research it, and it sort of is all consuming for them. So they don't have a sense a lot of times that it's not okay to talk about it at certain times. It's on their mind all the time, and so they figure everyone else kind of wants to hear about it as well. So there's a really nice strategy to use with this, and that is to teach some time and place rules. And so we're on Appendix 2 now in the PowerPoint. So just teaching kids that there are times and places when it's okay. So I've got a list of time and place rules here that would be appropriate for school, and you could develop a similar one for home, just with some minor changes. So you might say the topic can be discussed during recess, breaks, after school, on the bus, walking to and from school. It can be discussed during meetings of special interest clubs, or it might be included in academic assignments if the teacher gives permission ahead of time, if it has to do with that academic assignment. So if you've got a kid whose topic of interest is dinosaurs, then if they asked ahead of time, maybe they could include that. But there might be times when it's not okay. If you're writing a report on the Middle Ages, then that's not a time when you would be able to put dinosaurs in the report. But with prior teacher permission, that's fine. Might be discussed with community mentors who are working in that field. Could be discussed when you're working on a special project for a science fair or a job fair. And then you have a few times when it may not be discussed. So it's not okay to talk about it during instruction time in school when the teacher is teaching. It's not okay to discuss that topic during independent work time, so working at your seat. And then materials relating to it, like books or catalogs, magazines, any kind of materials, those may be accessed in accordance with those same rules listed above. So you could add some home rules. It's like maybe at dinner time we talk about how everybody's day went. So at dinner time we don't talk about that topic. We don't talk about dinosaurs or tectonic plate movement or whatever the topic of interest is for that kid that's so intense. We talk about family things, but then you can talk about it after dinner when you're done with your homework. We can talk about it, and we will listen to what you found on the internet, or we'll talk about how you're going to use that topic in your science project. So you can just add on some home rules, or make a separate set of home rules. But I think it's good for kids to learn at a fairly early age that there are times when it isn't necessarily appropriate to talk about their topic of intense interest, and that they do need to be on topic with the family or with the teacher on other topics at certain times. So those are called time and place rules. The third behavior we're going to talk about is meltdowns over changes in routine. And that is, of course, related to an intense need for routine and consistency, a need for sameness with kids on the spectrum. And that's pretty universal with kids with Asperger syndrome. They have a need for predictability and routine. And it's also related to really big challenges in shifting attention from one thing to the next. So sometimes the routine is going as usual at home or at school, but then suddenly someone says, oh, we've run out of time, put that away, we need to move on. So that might happen at home or at school. And it's oftentimes really hard for kids with AS to abruptly stop what they're doing and shift. It's a hard cognitive task for them to stop suddenly and move on to something else. So often you do see meltdowns for that reason, as well as just when there's some change in the overall routine that they weren't told about, or that they maybe weren't prepared for. So some strategies to deal with that include, and we're going to look at number 2 here first on the PowerPoint, preparing kids for changes in routine ahead of time when you can. Now, it's not always possible. At home, you might have a routine of going to the grocery store at 2 o'clock every Saturday, or going first thing Saturday morning. But then one of the siblings in the family breaks his arm at soccer, and you're not going to do the routine. You're going to have an emergency and take care of that issue. And so you can't always prepare kids for changes in routine. Stuff comes up, obviously, at home and at school. But if you know ahead of time that, this Saturday we're going to grandma's instead of going to the grocery store at the usual time, and we'll go to the grocery store on Monday, if you can let kids know ahead of time, that just really helps enormously for kids to handle that change. And same thing at school. If you know there's going to be a change in the schedule or the routine, just letting kids know ahead of time helps. But you can't always do that. So on Appendix 3, we're going to show a strategy for teaching kids how to handle changes in routine. This involves just teaching some basic steps on what to do when a routine change occurs. You'll see on the PowerPoint, I've labeled this steps for handling changes in routine. Sometimes I also call it the "it's not what I thought would happen" skill. This thing that's happening is not what I thought would happen. So you can just give it a name, and then you're just going to teach again ahead of time, just in little brief practice sessions at home or at school. Teach kids the steps for what to do when they are faced with a sudden change or a sudden shift in their routine, or when they encounter something that they totally did not expect. So with younger kids, you usually want to stay around 4 or 5 steps, and you would want to include some pictures or icons to help them to learn those steps. The steps we have here are stop. So you teach the kid to physically stop, take a deep breath, count to 3 or count to 5 to yourself, say okay, and follow the direction. So it's just a quick, get your body in control, those first 3 steps. Just stop, take a deep breath, count to 3 or count to 5, say okay and follow the direction. Do what the adult is asking you to do, or just move on. Um, and so, again, what you would do is just practice this a couple of times a day, maybe two little role play scenarios. Say, what about if we went to the store and they were all out of your favorite cookies? Or what would happen if we went to the movie theater and they were sold out of the movie you want to see? We can't have a meltdown in the store or the theater or at school. So what can you do instead? You stop, take a deep breath, count to 5, say okay, and move on. Follow the direction. Find another way. So that's the procedure for younger kids. For older kids, we're going to add a couple steps, and these are recommended by Michael Powers out of Yale University. He recommends adding steps 4 and 5 for older kids, maybe upper elementary on through secondary level, teenagers. So you'd still want to teach, get yourself physically in control. Stop, take a deep breath, count silently to 5. And he advocates having kids look around. Look around at what everyone else is doing. What's everyone else doing when the movie is sold out? Well, they're either going to a later show or they are going to a different movie right now. So look around, what's everyone doing? Ask a friend or ask a peer or ask someone in your family, what are you going to do? What do you think we should do? And then go ahead and follow the direction or move on to something else. Make a decision. So with older kids, the idea then is to teach them to sort of start noticing how others are handling this change in routine or this unexpected event. So this skill obviously does not happen overnight. It takes time to learn any kind of new social skill, but it's so worth it to teach this as kind of the go-to process when you encounter something that's not what you thought would happen. I have taught this to kids as young as kindergarten. In fact, I taught it to a group of parents and educators in a school district a couple of years ago, and I was talking to school teams, and then there were also parents in the audience. And one of the teams that came was a school team I had been working with a kindergartner, and he had really tough time with changes in routine, and he had big meltdowns when things didn't go the way he thought that they should according to the schedule or routine. And I was at his school a couple months after I taught this in-service, and his general ed teacher, it was the end of the day, and she came running down the hall when she saw me. I was actually at the school to see another kid, but she came running down the hall and said, "Oh my goodness, Melisa, I have to tell you what has happened with this kid." And so she took me to her classroom and showed me that they had made a bunch of little cards with the steps on them, and they had pictures for each of the steps, and they had laminated these and had them at various places around the classroom. And then they had also sent copies home, and they had worked on it there as well. But she told me that the day before I was there, so this was a couple months again after the team had learned this strategy. She said the very day before that, something happened in her kindergarten class, and she had forgotten to tell this little guy that there was going to be a change in routine. And so she told him to put his work away and get ready for the assembly or whatever it was. And he started to get really upset because this was very abrupt. And she just looked at him and she said, "You need to do your steps." And that's what they had labeled them. Now, they had been practicing it for just a couple minutes every day for maybe a month and a half or 2 months. So she said that he walked over to her desk where she had a copy of these steps. He pulled out the card and he stopped. He took a deep breath. She heard him count to 5. He said, "Okay." And then he put the card back on her desk, walked back to his desk, sat down, and she said he sat there for about 10 seconds, and then he stood up, pointed back at her desk, and said, "I need to do those again." So he knew he wasn't ready. That's a real step in learning self-regulation, knowing when you are and are not upset, knowing when you're ready to move on. That was a wonderful story, and I thanked her for telling me that. Truly, if a 5-year-old can learn that, any kid can learn that. Any adult can learn that as well. And I know you have adults in your life who do not handle this well either. If you want a quick assessment of how adults handle changes or unexpected events, go on vacation with them, because you'll immediately know, because stuff goes wrong on vacation. So you have to be ready when it's not the right car rental or it's not the right hotel room. So everybody needs this skill in life, and certainly kids on the spectrum can learn it. It just takes some practice. It takes doing, practicing with some role play every day for just a couple minutes, and then reinforcing some kind of little point system or some motivation for learning it and for doing the steps when you're faced with those kinds of issues. So that's our third behavior. Our next behavior is rules policing, and that's sort of reporting on other kids' infractions or other students' infractions. This is pretty common with kids with AS because they again have sometimes a literal interpretation of language and of class rules. They might have a narrow interpretation, so they don't understand that there are some unwritten rules that or exceptions to rules, and they don't know about those. They have, again, sometimes a real intense need for routine and rule following, and then they do sometimes have issues with, again, perspective taking and taking someone else's viewpoint. So you do get some at home and at school. You get some rules policing. They want to report that someone else is not following the rules, and so that can be problematic, and I have lots of parents and teachers tell me that they would like to eliminate some of that behavior. So a couple of strategies here involve, I'm going to go to Appendix 4. Number 1, teaching exceptions as part of the rules. So embedding exceptions in your home rules or your class rules. We'll do class rules first, and then I'll give you some ideas for home rules. So a way to embed the exceptions would be to just write the exception in right after the rule, and then it becomes part of the rule. I think this is ingenious. This is also a recommendation from Michael Powers. He works at Yale University, and he does lots of work with young adults with Asperger and also kids. But embedding those exceptions right into it makes them part of the rules. So you might say, number 1 rule is do what the teacher says, no exceptions there. Number 2, stay in your seat. Except during independent seat work, students may get up to get a drink or sharpen their pencils without asking. So now when kids get up without asking, the kid with AS doesn't feel the need to report that because the rule says that you can go ahead and do that. The exception is now part of the rule. Another example might be raise your hand to talk, except during instruction, like when the teacher is at the whiteboard and she turns around to ask the group a question and she starts with the word class. If she says class, then everybody can answer the question without raising their hands. So now that exception is part of the rule. Let's look at some exceptions for home. So your rules at home that you might have posted might be you need to follow directions or do what mom and dad say. Do your assigned job in the house. So maybe all the kids have a job. Except if you are with friends or you have an activity at the time of day when you usually do your job. So let's say you're going to a sleepover with some friends and you usually help clean up the dishes after dinner. Well, tonight we knew that ahead of time, so you're going to trade jobs with your brother, and you'll do his job tomorrow morning and he'll do the dishes tonight. So the exception is if we know ahead of time, we can trade jobs, or we can make a change to make that okay. Or keep hands, feet, and objects to self, except when the family is playing touch football, and then it's okay to touch, not to push, but to touch. And so it's okay to keep hands and feet, use hands rather, just for touching during touch football. So you, again, just embed those exceptions right into the rules, and that really helps kids who are rule driven to understand that there are sometimes exceptions to the way things are set up. Another great way to teach kids about not needing to police other people's behaviors or their rule infractions is to teach a quick self-regulation skill for checking whether the behavior is related to that kid or to someone else. And so if you look at your PowerPoint here, we have a stop and check skill. So you basically teach the kid to quickly ask themselves three questions. Whose behavior is it? Is it my behavior or someone else's? So is it me doing the behavior, or is it my brother? Is it me, or is it someone else in my classroom? And then number two, who is affected? Does it affect me or someone else? So let's say you've got a kid at home and his sister goes and gets a cookie out of the cookie jar before dinner, and the rule is you're not supposed to have snacks in the hour before dinner. So is that something that that kid needs to report? Who is affected? Does it affect me or someone else? She's eating the cookie. Does it affect that kid or not? So you ask them to sort of think through who is doing the behavior, who is affected, and finally, whose decision is it? Is it my decision or the teacher's? Is it my decision or the parent's decision? Is it my decision if she gets in trouble for eating a snack right before dinner, or is it mom's decision, or is it dad's decision? So those are three quick questions to help kids start to learn that they don't need to police other people's behaviors, that they can let those things go if it doesn't have to do with them. Whose behavior is it? Who is affected? Whose decision is it? So that's a quick, I just call it the stop and check skill. So quickly check that before you talk to an adult about it. So you don't necessarily need to report all rule infractions at home or at school to the adult. Our last behavior is seeking attention from peers, from friends or kids in the classroom, or from siblings in an appropriate way. Lots of kids with AS develop ways to get attention that aren't necessarily good ways because they do want to have friends, they do want to interact with people, but they don't have the social repertoire. So the first feature of Asperger syndrome that's related to that is an inadequate social repertoire, just having the skills for accessing attention from people or making friends. The second piece is that sometimes kids with AS misinterpret the behavior of their peers. So sometimes they think a peer laughing at them means that they're their friend. So, well, Jonathan laughed and so he's my friend. But sometimes that is a misinterpretation of kids' intention or reaction. Sometimes the attention that they get from misbehavior, again, is just mislabeled in their minds as friendship. Those are the two hardwiring issues that are related to this. So our first strategy for helping kids with this behavior is to teach social skills in a systematic way and to teach them with a curriculum, just like you would teach the steps of long division or any other academic skill. And you can teach social skills at home or at school. There are lots of good social skills programs out there. There's a program by Jeanette McAfee called Navigating the Social World that's written specifically for kids on the spectrum. There's a program by Jed Baker. Any of his social skills programs are specifically geared for kids on the spectrum. There are lots and lots of good programs, but they already have the steps of the skills written, so you don't need to make up the steps. They're already included in these social skills curricula. There's a program called Skill Streaming, and that's by Arnold Goldstein. And there's a preschool level or early childhood level, an elementary level, and a secondary level. So that one would be for adolescents. And they, again, have the steps of the skills already written. So any of those programs, you can open the book to page 55, look up the skill, and it's got the steps right there. So in the PowerPoint, you can take a look. We're just going to walk through some common skill deficits across different social skills areas. So the first one is conversation skills. Now there are lots of different conversation skills. There are lots and lots of skills in each of these areas, but I've just focused on the top 3 or 4 that seem to come up again and again as issues, and whose lack of which sometimes end up with behavioral problems. So conversation skills, teaching especially reciprocity in a conversation, being able to answer questions on the topic at hand or ask someone about their interest, topic maintenance, staying on the topic at hand and not sort of steering the conversation to the kids' intense topic of interest, how to open and close a conversation. Those are some really good skills for just teaching kids to interact with friends and to stay on the topic in conversations. That's sometimes a really tough thing for kids with AS to do, because again, they want to go back to their particular topic. In the area of coping skills, the 3 that sort of float to the top as problematic are taking no for an answer. So many times you'll see a meltdown over that, and many of those social skills programs I mentioned have a specific skill. So again, you turn to the page in the curriculum and it says taking no for an answer, and then the steps might be something like look at the person, say okay, find another way, or find something else to do, or find an alternative. So you have just specific steps, just like we taught the steps of handling changes in routine. There are steps for each of these. So steps for handling teasing, steps again for handling changes in routine. One note about teasing and or bullying, I think it's really important that kids with AS know that they do need to report that right away so that they get adult help. If they feel like they're being bullied, they need to have the backing of parents and teachers right away, of school administration. It needs to be investigated really quickly. So kids need to know that that's a rule infraction that does need to be reported right away. And most schools have some kind of policy on bullying prevention and a school-wide program for that. So it's really important to have the discussion about what is bullying, what are the types of bullying, and who do you report that to. So that's, I think, goes even above just learning a social skill of walking away or ignoring or asking someone to stop it. It also does need to really be reported, and that needs to be one of the steps there. In terms of relationship building or friendship building, how to join a group, making invitations, turn taking is critical. Again, that goes back to reciprocity with, we listen to your music and then mine, we play your video game and then mine. Turn taking and reciprocity are critical for friendships all through life, and that's a really crucial skill under relationship building that you can teach that will help kids really, really develop those skills in the long term. And then under classroom skills, things like hand raising or how to ask for help the right way, how to pay attention, what does that look like? The social skill for paying attention is sitting quietly and looking at the teacher. Or the social skill for listening, let's say at the dining room table at home, is sitting quietly and listening to the person who's talking. So you can teach those attention skills at home as well, but those are kind of the main skills for a school setting. There are some resistance skills that I think are important for adolescents, how to say no. If someone's pressuring you to do something, what do you do? And again, in those social skills programs like skill streaming in the adolescent section, saying no might involve looking at the person, saying no or saying no thanks, and then walking away, or giving a reason and walking away. So if a lot of times kids in adolescence are in situations where they're feeling uncomfortable about being asked to do something, or maybe what's going on at a party, they're uncomfortable about that. So those resistance skills, being able to leave a situation, give a reason, quickly get out of a place where they don't feel comfortable are really important. I had a parent tell me, she's a parent of a boy with Asperger syndrome who is 17, and she's also a paraeducator in a special ed classroom. She told me that she and her husband discussed this skill with their son over and over. And it's like, if you're in a situation where you feel like something's not right, call us right away. You've got your cell phone. Say no, call us, and leave the situation. And so they taught him the steps for getting out of an uncomfortable situation. And as it turned out, he, after practicing this over a long period of time, he asked to go to a party with some kids who attended his high school. He went to the party. There was not adult supervision, and one of the kids talked him into taking a sip of a beverage that he thought didn't taste right. Now, it was orange. They had taken the label off. They told him it was Orange Crush. It turned out to be a malt liquor beverage, and he took a sip of that, knew that it wasn't right, and immediately he remembered the steps of what to do when you're not comfortable. So he got on his cell phone, called his parents, told the kids he had to go. He said, "Oh, my mom said I have to be home right now." He quickly gave that reason, and then his parents picked him up. And because they had practiced that skill so many times, he knew exactly what to do in a situation where he was not comfortable or he didn't feel safe. And so those are really, really important skills for older kids, and developing those resistance or getting out of a situation that doesn't feel right. And then under body language skills, these are really important as well for kids with Asperger syndrome. Just knowing how close to stand to someone, what's appropriate physical proximity. You can teach from a very young age that you want to stay about arm's length when you're having a conversation. Teaching about eye contact, that you don't have to look at the person the whole time you're talking, but if you just maybe occasionally glance up, and then you can look away again if you listen better. For example, when you're looking away or looking down, you just occasionally glance up, because that lets the person know that you are listening. So what's appropriate touching, what is appropriate posture. So those are, especially, again, those start to be very important in adolescence, but can be taught from an earlier age. But just those kinds of body language skills. And then for kids in high school and post-high school, employment skills. And again, all of these skills would be included in the social skills curricula, and you'll see the names of these in the PowerPoint. But for employment situations, how to ask questions, how to approach someone and ask for clarification, how to take feedback from a boss without becoming angry, how to interview, how to disagree politely with a coworker if you don't agree with something they're saying or proposing. So those are some basic skills. Now, I do want to make a disclaimer here that there's no way that any parent or any teacher could teach all of these skills to every kid in every setting. This is really meant to be kind of a cookbook style to say, gosh, what does my kid need? He needs maybe a conversation skill to be able to stay on the topic, and he needs to know how to ask for help in the classroom, and he needs to know how to take turns with his friend who lives next door. So you may pick and choose these, obviously, according to an individual kid's needs, but there's no way you can tackle all of this with every kid. You just have to prioritize, and it really will be just an individual decision, because all kids are so different from one another and have different needs and different skill levels. But I think using curriculum that's already written is really helpful. So in the PowerPoint here, again, I've listed some names. Skill streaming, we talked about that. There's a program called Accepts by Hill Walker, and that's for an elementary into maybe even into middle school. Has all of those basic skills that we just talked about and more, many more. There's one called Superheroes. There's one called Navigating the Social World. There are the Jed Baker books. And then Carol Gray, many people are familiar with Carol Gray's social stories. And the idea behind social stories is that you write a story. Often it's written in the first person with the kid as kind of the center of the story. And then it just basically describes a social situation or a potential social problem or behavior problem, and then gives some prescriptive or what to do sentences in the story, and then ends with maybe a perspective statement. So if if you had a kid maybe who was having problems because the bus was going, one day went a different route, or you anticipate that the bus might go a different route, you could write a social story that would help the kid with that situation. So you might say, the first couple sentences just describe. So you'd say, most days, except weekends and holidays, we go to school and I ride on the bus. Almost every day, the bus goes the same way. So then you describe what happens that might be a problem. So you say, but some days the bus has to go a different way because of road construction or because someone's absent. On these days, the bus goes a different route, but that's okay. I will still get to school. When this happens, I can either read my book or listen to my headphones, and it will be okay. I will still get to school. And then at the end of the story, you might put in a perspective statement like, if I do this and I'm feeling okay about it, it will make my teacher happy and my parents happy. And the other kids on the bus will feel good about it too. So you put a perspective statement saying other people will notice that everybody has stayed calm. So that helps to teach kids perspective as well. So social stories are wonderful because they can be individualized according to the whatever the behavioral issue is, and to help tackle that, and then can be reviewed on a daily basis, especially prior to those situations that might be problematic for a kid. So just to review, I think any of these social skills can be taught. You need to do a little bit of role playing. I always like to give a rationale. For example, we're going to learn about how to take no for an answer because sometimes mom and dad have to say no, and sometimes your teacher has to say no. And we do that because we want to keep you safe and happy. So sometimes we do have to say no. So it's good for you to know how to handle that. So if you give kids a rationale for the particular skill they're learning, they're much more likely to accept the steps of the skill and to be willing to learn it and to practice it. And I also think it's a great idea to have some kind of reinforcement plan, just as we did with some of the earlier interventions. So a point card or a chart on the refrigerator or in the classroom where kids get some kind of reinforcement or recognition that's visual, where they're maybe working toward some kind of privilege, so that they get some motivation for trying. Learning these skills can be really difficult, and they take a lot of effort to be able to walk through and practice. And so I think it's a great idea to have some kind of reinforcement system to provide that motivation for trying and attempting new skills like this. But I also think in the big picture, it's good to give kids a rationale about why social skills are important, and that they're related to making friends and getting along with people and having a job someday and getting along with your family, that it's important because it helps us get along. I was working on a pilot program with a school district where we taught all of the secondary schools, we taught the teams how to teach social skills, and then we provided them with social skills programs, and all the kids who had been identified as having Asperger syndrome were participating in these social skills groups 3 to 4 times a week. And we were just getting started in it, and I was sitting in an IEP meeting with one of the kids who happened to be in one of these. He was 15 at a middle school, and his mom at the beginning of the IEP meeting said, "Hey, tell me a bit more about the social skills groups. I'm so excited about them, and I know we gave permission for him to be in those groups and he's really enjoying them, but tell me a little bit more." And so we were describing the times of day they happened and how we structured the groups and how we had peer models. And she said he's just absolutely loving them. But she said, "I have to tell you a funny story. He came home last night, and he had social skills during the day, the social skills group." And she said that he walked up to her and said, "Mom, how many social skills are there?" And she said, "Gosh, I don't know. There are lots and lots of skills, and lots of different kinds of skills too, but I don't know that I could give you an exact number. Why do you want to know?" And he said, "Because I want you to find out what they are and I'm going to learn every one of them. So the light had just gone on for him. He understood that this was the connection and the conduit for making social contacts, for making friends and keeping friends, and he was so excited to learn the rules. He wanted to know what the social rules were. And so he just could not wait to learn them all. And I've spoken with or read accounts by many adults with AS where they, upon finding out there are social skills, have the same reaction. It's like, I want to learn all of them. They buy books on social skills and say, wow, if I had known there were rules, I would have studied these long ago. And so I think adults as well really get excited about the fact that there are rules. You can look up how to disagree with your coworker. You can look up how to make an invitation to a party. You can look up how to, what the rules are and how close to stand to people. So I think across the board, this is such a big area and a really worthwhile use of time at school and at homes to teach these basic social skills. So that wraps up our session on behaviors, some quick tips on those 5 behaviors. And thanks so much for listening. This is Melisa Genaux.